Orban called Ukraine a dependent and less sovereign state, and Hungarians have started blocking Ukrainian media. Crimea has been left without air defense. Ukrainian special forces destroyed the expensive S-400 Triumph air defense systems. In the Russian army, due to a shortage of equipment, soldiers are being taught to storm positions on horseback. Sex scandal. The son of a well-known Russian colonel is selling himself to men for money. In Poland, an unstable, aggressive Pole blocked a bus with Ukrainians and held people hostage for half an hour. Fuel crisis in Russia. Gasoline is being sold at a limit of 30 liters per person. Russia is preparing sabotage groups to stage provocations in Poland. Hello, my name is Instasia Dmitrovskaya. Right now, let's talk about the main news. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you here on YouTube. In temporarily occupied Crimea, Ukrainian special forces struck the radar station of the S-400 Triumph system. The expensive air defense system, designed to counter drones among other threats, was neutralized by Special Operations Forces strike drones. It is worth noting that the radar station serves as the eyes of the S-400 Triumph complex, and without this surveillance and targeting component, the entire system loses its effectiveness. On the Hungarian front, there are no changes. The country's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, continues to confirm his status as a pro-Russian scoundrel day after day. Commenting on the flights of Hungarian drones over Ukraine, Orban claimed that Ukraine has no right to be offended or outraged, because Ukraine is not a sovereign state.
Let's suppose the drones flew a few meters into Ukraine. So what? Ukraine is not an independent sovereign country. We are keeping it afloat. It shouldn't act as if it's sovereign. The West is keeping it afloat.
And look how interesting this turns out. At first, Orban didn't acknowledge the drones. Now he says that 2 or 3 drones from Hungary are what Ukraine should be dealing with, and supposedly there are no enemies here.
It has lost a fifth of its territory in the war with the Russians. The Russians took that from them. That's where their sovereignty ended. We are holding on to the rest of the territory. If the West decides not to give a single penny, Ukraine is finished. It will disappear. 2 or 3 Hungarian drones are not what Ukraine should be dealing with.
Ukraine has already responded to Orban's scandalous statement, but our foreign ministry says the Prime Minister is intoxicated by Kremlin propaganda.
The good news is that Prime Minister Orban has admitted it. Certain drones entered Ukrainian airspace from the direction of Hungary. But the bad news is that the Prime Minister continues to be poisoned by Russian propaganda. We look forward to hearing his opinion on state sovereignty and independence as soon as he frees himself from dependence on Russian energy resources. This has been repeatedly noted by US President Donald Trump and European partners.
Well, maybe not enemies, but definitely not friends. Let me remind you that in addition to Orban constantly opposing the allocation of European aid to Ukraine and speaking out against Russian sanctions, the last time Hungarian drones strayed like this, it ended with a Russian strike on a factory in Mukachevo. And let's not forget how these so-called not enemies dream about Zakarpattia. And at the start of the full-scale war, they moved troops to the border with Ukraine. But let's get back to today. Besides Orban's doubts about Ukraine, as if that wasn't enough, another remarkable event took place in Hungary. The Hungarian government blocked 12 Ukrainian media outlets. In Budapest, they called this a mirror response to Ukraine's ban on 2 Hungarian outlets, Nariga and Demokrata. But do you know what the difference is? Ukraine blocked the publication because they were spreading Russian propaganda, while Orban did it in his own style.
Ukraine, which is joining the European Union, blocked foreign outlets. Among them are Hungarian websites, because they dared to write critically about the sanctions policy against Russians, about military support for Ukraine, and to portray the EU and NATO as fragmented and ineffective. According to the principle of reciprocity, said Hungarian Prime Minister Gergely Gulyas.
So what do you think of Orban's policy? Do you think these are his genuine beliefs, or is it motivated by a love for the Russian ruble? I'm leaning toward the latter, but share your opinion in the comments. But it's encouraging that most people in the West are in their right mind, unlike Orban, and we know for sure that many Hungarians support us. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such a sensible audience. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well where you're watching from and whether people around you support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and meanwhile we continue. Now comes the most interesting part. Russians have started covering oil refineries with anti-drone nets to protect them from drones. This video is from Samara, and as you can see, they're using a web-like net to protect themselves from the constant drone threat. At the same time, some particularly enterprising Russians are already offering these nets for sale. But even the people in Samara are complaining that this is unlikely to help, because the nets themselves are stretched very close to the highest point of the tanks. They're only a few meters away, and the blast wave would still cause detonation. Meanwhile, the occupiers are facing increasingly serious problems with fuel. For example, hardly any is being delivered to Crimea anymore. And there, long lines have formed at gas stations. These lines have appeared not only because of the fuel shortage, but also due to the so-called authorities of the peninsula introducing restrictions, according to which each person can buy only 30 liters of gasoline. Meanwhile, at the beginning of the week, the head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, was assuring everyone that in 2 or 3 days there would be no problems with fuel. But that's unlikely, because Ukraine's attacks on oil refineries have already cost Russia more than $100 billion and have put a fifth of all production capacity out of commission. While the father, Colonel Alexander Shipov, the military commander of the 83rd Separate Air Assault Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces, promotes traditional values, his son sells himself to men and leaks his father's information. The RBC publication, citing Ukrainian intelligence services, reports on Colonel Shipov's son, Mikhail, who doesn't quite fit the traditional concept of an elite military family.
Mikhail Shipov, a third-generation military heir, leads a completely different life. He hides his orientation from his family and earns money by providing intimate services to wealthy men and occasionally to women as well.
And it was precisely thanks to this spicy information, or more specifically, the not-so-traditional son's desire to hide his preferences, that Ukrainian specialists obtained data about the colonel, for which the military officer could face criminal charges.
It should be noted that the previous commander of the 83rd Brigade, Artem Gorodilov, was removed from his position due to corruption. However, his successor, Colonel Shipov, confidently maintains the standard set by his predecessors. Russian military personnel are widely complaining that the 83rd Brigade systematically experiences corruption related to extorting money from the enlisted ranks. In addition, there are regular cases of soldiers going missing without a trace in the unit, which indicates a lack of control.
So that's quite an interesting story. And what do you think about all this? And now to news from the front. Deep state analysts report the occupation of the settlement of Poltavka in the Donetsk region.
The enemy has occupied Poltavka and has also advanced near Novoivanovka, Poltavka, and in the Naprimerensky sector.
In addition, Deep State reports that the enemy continues to exert pressure along the stretch from Serebryanka to Voinka. The main goal of the Russians here is the occupation of the Siversk agglomeration.
This area is one of those sectors where a large gray zone extends, illustrating the nature of the fighting. The enemy is able to infiltrate through the positions of Ukrainian fighters, which is due to the problem of a shortage of personnel to cover the entire defensive line. But the are unable to gain a foothold on the ground to amass forces for further advancement, and it is precisely the Ukrainian pilots who are preventing this. They relentlessly hunt enemy infantry.
The military situations in the Siversk direction confirm that the enemy has indeed become more active.
Siversk direction. The enemy has intensified activity on the stretch from Vyemka and is moving from the south along the railway line, gradually advancing toward the city. There is confirmation in the form of footage showing strikes on positions and the clearing of one of the strong points. All this indicates that the enemy is indeed consolidating its positions along this particular route. Our units have also found themselves in a difficult situation between the crossing and Vyemka. The enemy is trying not only to press this strong point, but also to simultaneously advance towards Zvonovka, again along the same railway line. If our Cossacks are not withdrawn in time, there is a serious risk of encirclement forming.
But despite the pressure from the Russian army, our soldiers are not only holding the line, but also defeating the enemy. For example, special forces from the SSO destroyed the positions of Russia's 810th Marine Brigade in the North Slobozansky direction. The occupiers are also being ground down in the Pokrovsk direction. There, drone system units disrupted yet another Russian operation called Truba. The situation within the ranks of the Russian army is also playing into our hands. First of all, the occupiers are switching to horses. This isn't as rare as with donkeys or camels. Russian war correspondents write that their soldiers are actually learning to storm positions on horseback. While some Russian soldiers are getting acquainted with extreme horseback riding, the occupiers in the Zaporizhzhia direction are being forced to pay their commanders. And as the Otesh movement reports, this concerns the 70th Motorized Rifle Regiment.
Our agents report that in the 70th Motorized Rifle Regiment, a mandatory fee of at least 10,000 rubles per person has been introduced. The money is handed over to a so-called cash fund and disappears without any reports or explanations. This is not just theft. This is the internal decay of the enemy's army. These extortions undermine combat effectiveness, demoralize the personnel, and weaken their positions at the front. Anyone who refuses to transfer money is sent to storm fortified positions without support, or is publicly beaten and thrown into a pit for several days. If they want to survive, they are required to pay at least 50,000 rubles each month with no guarantee that they won't be sent to the front lines tomorrow.
Ukrainian forces carried out unique operations. Using a drone, they shot down a Russian Mi-28 helicopter. We will definitely show you this footage. Additionally, Russian troops have not advanced in the Sumy region, are experiencing logistical problems in the Pokrovsk direction, and are facing a shortage of personnel on the Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk fronts. More details about the situations on the battlefields in our military review.
The Russian city of Belgorod was left without electricity and hot water after a missile strike by the Air Force. According to the local publication Pepel, one of the missiles hit the Belgorod thermal power plant. There was also a strike on the city's Luch substation. Parts of Stary Oskol, Shebekino, and several other settlements in the region were also left without electricity.
Moreover, these are exclusively retaliatory actions by the Ukrainian side. During his talks with Trump, the Ukrainian president emphasized that the actions of the Russian side are aimed at creating the so-called.
On the night of September 29th, drones also damaged infrastructure in the Moscow region. That same night, the Korachevsky electrodital plant in the Bryansk region of the Russian Federation was damaged. This enterprise was responsible for assembling and repairing modern weaponry for the Russian army.
Its products are used in the aerospace, electronic instrument manufacturing, and other industries. Specifically, these are connectors for printed circuit boards, military equipment, aircraft, antennas, bases, stations, and other systems, as well as, accordingly, components for measuring instruments.
Pilots of the 59th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces are successfully destroying enemy equipment on the front lines of the Russian-Ukrainian war. With the help of an FPV drone, they managed to shoot down a Russian Mi-28 helicopter. Partisans infiltrated the ranks of the enemy army and helped disable a Russian Pantsir S-1 in the Kherson region for several months. As a result, the incident created a gap in the air defense system in this direction, writes the partisan movement Otesh. Russian troops are unable to advance in the Sunga region in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson directions. The occupiers are also experiencing logistical problems in the Pokrovsk direction and a shortage of personnel on the Donetsk-Dnipropetrovsk front, although they are making slow progress there.
At the moment, the strategic objective of the Russian occupation army is to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk region. It is there that the main efforts and main forces of the occupation army are concentrated. It is precisely in the Donetsk direction that additional units are being transferred from Sumy and, accordingly, from Kherson to break through the Ukrainian defenses.
The level of desertion in the Russian army is increasing. In 2025, 1/10 of the entire Russian contingent in Ukraine deserted. In numbers, that's 70,000 people. This is reported by analysts from the Ukrainian think tank project Frontelligent Insight.
First and foremost, we are talking about colossal losses of personnel and the tactics of so-called local assault. That is why Russia fully understands that participating in assault operations is essentially a one-way ticket.
Russia does not use tankers to launch and control drones in European countries, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, citing intelligence data. In
the Kiel Canal, at the time when Russian drones violated Polish airspace, a cargo ship was detained according to German counterintelligence and law enforcement agencies. It was from this very cargo ship that drones were launched over Germany and several other European countries. The crew of the cargo ship, which was sailing under the flag of a third country, consisted of citizens of the Russian Federation. Moreover, such examples of using the so-called shadow fleet are not isolated incidents.
Russia has refused both bilateral and even trilateral peace negotiations, but it must wake up and recognize reality. The reality is that Russia is not killing many people, while at the same time suffering heavy losses itself, which it cannot boast about. This was stated by US Vice President J.D. Vance, who added that the administration, even before Trump, still strives for peace, but steps are needed from both sides to achieve it.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
One cannot help but admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a massive horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine. If you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. But it seems that the Poles should prepare for a foreign confrontation with the Russians because the Russian Federation is planning to carry out so-called sabotage activities and send sabotage groups into Poland through Belarusian territory. The thing is, Russian intelligence has published a fake report about alleged Ukrainian special services preparing sabotage attacks on Polish critical infrastructure.
Kyiv is supposedly preparing to stage an incursion into Poland with sabotage and reconnaissance groups made up of alleged special forces from Russia and Belarus. This was reported by the SVR. The agency noted that it is possible Kyiv's operation will involve simulating an attack on Polish critical infrastructure to provoke public outcry.
We know from our own sad experience what such warnings can lead to. The occupiers are simply trying to create an alibi for themselves. The European Union will allocate 2 billion euros to Ukraine for drone production. This was announced by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
If we still consider Ukraine to be our first line of defense, we must strengthen our military assistance to Ukraine. That is why we have specifically agreed with Ukraine that a total of 2 billion euros will now be spent on drones.
Von der Leyen also says that funding drone production should help Ukraine strengthen its own defense capabilities while simultaneously developing high technologies that are useful for the European Union. The United States has deployed so-called submarine hunters near Russia's borders. We are talking about P-8 Poseidon military aircraft. Newsweek reports that the American aircraft, which are capable of conducting reconnaissance operations, are now based in Norway and are active in the Baltic Sea.
The presence of the US Navy's P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft in northern Europe, designed for anti-submarine warfare, surface ship engagement, and reconnaissance missions, comes amid NATO's efforts to strengthen its defensive posture in the Baltic region, in response to the Russian threat to undersea cables and pipelines, as well as suspicious drone activity in Poland, Denmark, and Norway.
Meanwhile, within NATO, there is a proposal to establish an air defense zone over western Ukraine to intercept Russian drones and missiles. According to The Telegraph, citing an unnamed group of Western politicians and military officials, this shield could later be expanded to cover Kyiv as well. According to The Telegraph, such an operation would not involve strikes against Russian military forces, since the attacks are launched from deep within Russian territory, but it would serve as a demonstration of Europe's willingness to take risks and provide real assistance to Ukraine. American Tomahawk missiles will be made available to the Ukrainian armed forces. NATO has given permission for its long-range weapons to be used against targets on Russian territory. All the details are in our report.
A complete turnaround. Very soon, the White House will provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles. This was announced over the weekend in an interview with Fox News by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. And just 2 days later, U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg confirmed this intention. NATO will allow Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes against Russia.
I think that having read what he said, as well as what Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio said, the answer is yes. Use the opportunity to carry out long-range strikes. There is nothing sacred about it. And this is one of the reasons why I believe President Zelensky asked President Trump for Tomahawk missiles last week.
Just 2 weeks ago, Trump and his administration were categorically opposed to transferring, let alone striking Russian territory with American Tomahawk missiles. But after Zelensky and Trump met in New York on September 23rd, the White House's rhetoric changed. Ukraine's main argument is that having such missiles could increase pressure on Russia and force Putin to come to the negotiating table, possibly even without actually using this type of weapon. The transfer of Tomahawks also drew a response from the Kremlin. Putin's press secretary Peskov stated that there is no magic weapon for Kyiv that can change the dynamics on the battlefield.
There is no panacea that can now change the situation on the front lines for the Kiev regime. There is no magic weapon, and supposedly Tomahawks or other missiles won't be able to change the dynamics.
The Tomahawk missile has a range of up to 1,600 kilometers, which significantly exceeds the capabilities of the American HIMARS, multiple launch rocket systems used by the Ukrainian armed forces. The Tomahawk has greater speed and combat power compared to Ukrainian drones, which are capable of striking deep into Russian territory, but often encounter modern Russian air defense systems.
This is a bad message for the military and those assisting them who are located in the Bryansk, Kursk, Voronezh, and Rostov regions at the very least, as well as in the occupied territories, of course, wherever there are enemy military facilities. I believe that the demilitarization of Crimea from Russian presence will continue and that Donetsk and Luhansk, which are occupied, will be hit even more.
President Zelensky handed President Trump a list of the necessary military aid as part of a $90 billion agreement, and Ukraine also wants to hold separate negotiations with the US regarding the supply of specific types of weapons, particularly long-range ones.
All of this is included in our $90 billion agreement, but we are ready for separate contracts for specific types of weapons, including long-range ones. I can't share any more details.
I can't provide any further details at this moment.
According to the British publication ZSN, Ukrainian attacks on the oil refining sector alone have caused Russia more than $100 billion in damage. And that's without missile strikes. Once those are introduced, the amount of damage will increase many times over.
Russia is selling gas to China at a lower price than to Europe and Turkey, becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing. This is reported by journalists from Bloomberg.
According to a forecast from the Ministry of Economy presented to the State Duma on Monday along with the draft budget, it is expected that over the next 3 years, gas prices for China will be at least 27% lower than for supplies to Turkey and Russia's few remaining clients in Europe. In 2025, the price gap will be even greater, 38%.
After losing most of the European market, Gazprom is now betting on China. However, sales there are less profitable, which only highlights Moscow's growing dependence. The Kremlin is helping China prepare for a landing in Taiwan. Meanwhile, Beijing is actively supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine. We will tell you how, right under the nose of Washington, Brussels, and the entire democratic world, two powerful dictatorships are rapidly growing closer.
Russia has secretly armed China and has essentially assembled an assault battalion for a landing on Taiwan. This is not just about supplying equipment or making gestures of alliance. This is a full-fledged combat kit. Leaked documents and investigations by the British Royal United Services Institute reveal this. Moscow is preparing Beijing for war.
In actual fact, the Russian Federation did not just now sign the relevant and important agreement with China. This has been an ongoing process. This was done back in October 2023.
The contract includes the supply of airborne equipment kits and related assets designed for a reinforced airborne battalion. We're talking about 37 BMD-4M airborne combat vehicles, 11 Sprut SDM-1 light tanks and 11 Rakushka armored personnel carriers, as well as command and staff vehicles, mobile artillery command posts, Garland 10 reconnaissance UAVs and Dalnolet parachute systems, which allow special forces to glide for dozens of kilometers. According to experts, the deal is estimated to be worth about $584 million.
The agreements specify that all armored vehicles must be equipped with Chinese communication and control systems and also tested for electromagnetic compatibility with Russian electronic equipment. This is due both to the need to maintain interoperability with other Chinese units and to the higher technical capabilities of Chinese equipment. In addition, the Russian side must prepare equipment and software for the use of Chinese munitions.
And here a perfectly logical question arises. Why would China, which has a 2 million strong army and its own developments, buy Russian weapons? The Chinese airborne troops have relatively little armored equipment. There are about 180 ZBD-03s. These are light vehicles designed for airdrop from helicopters. The BMD-4M and Sprut radically increase the firepower of the airborne troops, turning light infantry into a strike force. And most importantly, along with the equipment, Beijing receives not only hardware, but also Russia's combat experience from the largest war of the 21st century. The war against Ukraine,
The People's Republic of China is actively trying to get the absolute most out of this particular agreement, to thoroughly absorb the valuable experience and at the very same time diligently work out various and sundry ways of direct military intervention in the daily life of the island of Taiwan, and ultimately returning it under Beijing's complete and total control.
An important point is logistics. To land an entire battalion, you need about 35 military transport aircraft, IL-76s and Y-20s. That's almost half of the available fleet under the Celestial Empire, which has 75 aircraft. The operation is possible, but it would require enormous resources and complete control of the airspace. Russian analysts note that this is about a real strengthening of vertical maneuver capabilities. When the Marines land from the sea and paratroopers seize key inland facilities.
There's no need to worry about the fate of Taiwan anymore. Russian paratroopers have taken on the task of preparing the Chinese for an invasion of the free island. Undoubtedly, Russian experience is invaluable. No one knows how to burn in BMPs and APCs quite like the Russians do. Years of war in Ukraine have taught the paratroopers how to burn up with their entire crews, with all their live cargo, ammunition and supplies, the indomitable airborne forces of the Russian Federation. And in the skills of rapid, panicked retreats, drunken marches across memorial fields and swatting drones with entrenching shovels. Notably, the highly flammable equipment was also purchased by China from the Russian Federation. Why would a technologically advanced country need iron coffins like the BMD-4M and BTR-MDM, which have already proven their inadequacy? That remains a separate mystery. However, the Russians will be able to teach the Chinese valuable lessons in frontline alcoholism, mass drug abuse, looting, and fountain bathing.
I wouldn't downplay the capabilities of the Russian Federation right now, especially in terms of sharing their experience with airborne operations.
In fact, Russia is selling China not just vehicles, but a ready-made action plan. Trained personnel, command structures, and documentation. At the same time, Moscow receives foreign currency, increases Beijing's dependence on Russian technologies in the security sphere, and demonstrates a strong allied bond.
In this particular case, we are essentially witnessing the coordinated actions of both Beijing and Moscow, countries that are united in a deeply revanchist manner with the explicit aim of taking complete control over those specific territories that both of these dictatorial regimes deem absolutely necessary for the fulfillment of their strategic objectives. Therefore, this is indeed a very serious and significant signal right now, both for the Western nations and for Ukraine's international partners, that the extensive cooperation between the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation actually goes far beyond just political and economic ties. And it's not simply about China investing in the Russian military-industrial complex, as some might assume. But we also clearly see the reverse effect, where Russia, for at least the past 2 full years, has been actively helping to implement a military scenario against the democratic island of Taiwan.
Well, every deal has its flip side. Half of the transport aviation is involved in a single landing operation, and that's a serious risk. The equipment requires adaptation, and the political cost of the deal is enormous.
Active exercises around the island of Taiwan and corresponding steps in cooperation with the Russian Federation are being used by Beijing as a tool of pressure in further negotiations with the United States on the Taiwan issue. It's clear that Trump is interested in making sure that Communist China does not launch military actions against Taiwan during his presidency. That is until January of 2029. And he will undoubtedly do everything humanly possible to truly delay the full implementation of such a complex and potentially impactful scenario. But as various credible intelligence reports directly and unequivocally state, China will actually be ready for a military operation against Taiwan as early as 2026 or 2027.
And whatever the case may be, China now has not just Russian equipment, but a ready-made combat scenario honed in the bloodiest war of the 21st century. These secret deliveries could mark the beginning of new military tensions, only this time in the Asia-Pacific region.
I don't want to say not a day without adventures with the Poles, but the situation is telling and unpleasant. At one of the gas stations in Poland, a Pole attacked a bus carrying Ukrainians. At first, it was an unstable Pole who was harassing Ukrainian women, and a man, burning with righteous anger, stood up for them. As it later turned out, he was from the military. And when the Pole heard Russian being spoken, he started to chase the man and shout. Guess what? That's right, go back to Ukraine. It got to the point where the Poles started blocking the bus and wouldn't let it leave, and this went on for half an hour. The group of Poles nearby kept applauding their unruly compatriot the whole time. The passengers on that same bus, in turn, called the police, and once the officers took a statement about the unruly, aggressive man, the driver finally left. What do you think of our news? Let us know what we should change to get better. We'll definitely take it into account. In the meantime, give this video a like and a thumbs up to support what we're doing. It's very important to us, and be sure to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you soon.